Smartphones. Most of us have one, right? Because they're amazing devices. They keep us connected. But what if every time you answered your phone, you were directly tied to tragedy? You hear panic. A car just crashed. My house is on fire. Or worse, all you hear is screaming. I worked as a 911 operator for 20 years, and every time I answered my phone, I was instantly connected to someone's crisis. Possibly their worst day, but for me, it was my work day. I remember a young woman who called, and before she could tell me what was wrong, she had to tell me she has PTSD. What do you think of when you hear post-traumatic stress disorder? I picture soldiers returning from war zones. But because of this image, we can tend to have a narrow view of who can fall victim to this stress and trauma injury. So when the young woman's on the phone telling me she has PTSD, I'm thinking, hold on, are you a soldier returning from a war zone? I have to be honest, I dismissed her. And I completely dismissed the possibility that she could have that stress and trauma injury because I didn't see her in that picture. And I'm embarrassed to say this because even though I was a 911 operator, the clear signs and symptoms of stress and trauma injuries were not part of our workplace awareness. There was no plan for us to follow. We didn't know the many faces that can fall victim to stress and trauma. We didn't know your brain can change. You can experience sadness, difficulty sleeping, anger. And because of this, we didn't know we could fall victim simply by sitting in an office answering 911 calls, constantly connected to crisis. And no one told us that preventing the pain of PTSD is far easier than treating the trauma. 911 calls are tragedies unfolding, and although it was our job just to send the help that was needed, it was really hard not to get emotionally connected to the person on the other end of that line. Not unlike many jobs where you're the caregiver to someone who desperately needs care. I'll never forget this one call. She simply said, "Please send police to my home. I'm going to hang myself, and I don't want my family to find me." This woman was a nurse, and she'd spent her life caring for other people like you and me. Is it possible that stress and trauma injuries were not part of her workplace awareness either, and maybe there was no plan for her to follow? So she herself and her coworkers missed the signs and dismissed the symptoms because she was the caregiver and not the one lying in the hospital bed. The truth is, most people do not recognize the signs or the symptoms. And that's why we need to implement a plan in all workplaces so no one is left to suffer in silence. For most of my career as a 911 operator, I had a healthy mental hygiene routine. We have dental hygiene where you brush your teeth. We have personal hygiene, you wash your hands. Mental hygiene is how we manage our stress. But I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just did it. It wasn't purposeful. But earlier in my career, if I had difficulty dealing with a tragedy, my plan was to pause, listen, and assess my needs. And if time off from work was what was needed, I took it. But like most people's jobs today, our workplace demands increased. The volume of calls increased. And the need to fill overtime shifts increased. And that put pressure on all of us. I stopped practicing my mental hygiene routine, putting my self-care last. forgetting my plan that had kept me healthy and able to care for those who desperately needed it. One night, I answered the phone. And at first, all I could hear was screaming. And then she's shouting, "Don't do it!" over and over again, because her husband is sitting in the basement with a loaded gun pointed at his head. I'm on the other end of the line with her for over an hour, trying to convince her to leave the house so police could convince him to put the gun down. I'm worried for everyone's safety that night, but not my own, because I'm in an office, safe. Fortunately, that call ended without tragedy for any of them. But as I hang up the phone, I become so angry. The stress that had been building overwhelmed me, and I threw my headset against the wall and stormed outside, collapsing on the stairwell, and sobbed uncontrollably. This has never happened to me before in my career, ever. The overtime had taken my recovery time, my plan I used to stay healthy. But I didn't even realize I was changing, even though I was having difficulty sleeping and started to develop breathing problems. I didn't realize my personality was changing, even though I didn't want to be with my friends. And I didn't want to be with my family. My brain had changed. Everything around me was the same, but nothing felt the same. The signs I'd been missing was the anger, sadness, difficulty sleeping. And the biggest symptom I was dismissing was my personality changing. But let me tell you about dismissing yourself. I start having breathing problems, and it's a tightness in my chest, and no matter how deeply I'm inhaling, I'm not getting enough oxygen. My first thought, asthma. I get an inhaler, it doesn't help. My second thought, breast reduction. I've been carrying this weight around for years, and it's finally got to me. So I have the surgery, a few months recovery, and I'm looking forward to going back to work. There's literally been a weight lifted off my chest. I turn into the parking lot of the 911 center, and I can't get my breath. I'm not getting enough oxygen. I didn't realize this was anxiety. I didn't feel anxious, I just couldn't breathe. I'm sitting in my car and I know I need help, but it still takes me 11 months before I get help because it was really hard for me to see myself in that picture. And you know, when the young woman called telling me she had PTSD, I had no idea that I too was suffering from PTSD. Because a prevention plan was not securely in place in our work environment, my coworkers and I missed the signs in ourselves and each other, and we dismissed the symptoms we were suffering from. Many of us in the 911 center had emotional wars raging inside as we suffered in silence. And many of us were forced to leave the career that we loved. But it's not just our office. There are many jobs today where people like you and me spend all day connected to stress and other people's trauma. Think of social workers, corrections officers, anyone working in a hospital or emergency ward. High-pressure careers and chronically understaffed workplaces that put unnecessary pressure on everyone. And there are so many more. Has anyone thought of tow truck drivers? They attend the same tragic, fatal car crashes that police officers, paramedics, and firefighters do, and they help clean up the mess. I'm happy to tell you, though, that legislation is being passed in North America recognizing 911 operators and other frontline caregivers can and do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And although this is a step in the right direction, we need to develop awareness in all workplaces. And while governments and employers are working to implement their prevention plans, we need to have an easy plan where we pause and listen to assess our needs. And that plan needs to be posted in our work environments, and it needs to be posted in our home environments, because it's just as important that our homes are safe and healthy as it is our places of work, and they're not immune to stress or trauma. A healthy mental hygiene routine is a solutions-based plan. So I use the acronym PLAN because it's easy. Pause, listen, assess needs. In times of stress or crisis, remember PLAN. Pause. Start by taking 2 deep breaths and listen to your body. Is your heart racing? Are you having difficulty catching your breath? Is your anger getting out of control? Are you going to yell or break down in tears? Assess. Is this a healthy situation to stay in? Is just recognizing what's going on enough, or do I need to take action? Needs. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? It might just be the 2 deep breaths and a glass of water. But maybe what you need is to talk to someone about how you're feeling. This plan helps us to be aware of ourselves so we don't miss symptoms we could be having. And if you manage your stress daily, when challenges come up in life, you're already practicing a plan that could help you through that crisis. I wish I'd known how damaging this could be years ago, and how important it is for us to make a plan part of all workplace training, because then maybe none of us would have to lose a career that we loved. Because there's one thing I can tell you for sure. It is far easier to prevent the pain of PTSD than it is to treat the trauma. Thank you very much.